So the words that we heard this morning from this latter chapter in the book of the prophet Isaiah are coming at the end of a long season of exile. You might remember the words, those of us who perhaps of a certain generation, the musical Godspell and the song, the lament sung on the willows there, we hung up our lyres. And that text comes from a psalm. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. So we are now at the dawn breaking, near the end of a season that has gone on for some 70 years, a whole lifetime. And now comes hope of a new chapter. We remember that in 70 years of exile, most who were carried off are no longer living on this earth. And we remember that those who are hearing a message of the exile ending were not there at its beginning. But in the context of loss and homelessness and profound change and confusion comes a promise of hope. I want you, if you will, alongside me, perhaps to make an effort to invite yourself into this story. For it may be that there have been moments in our own lives, or seasons, or even long seasons, that felt like exile to us. Seasons where we were in unfamiliar places, even hostile places. Or seasons in our lives where we felt trapped, where there was no hope of going home, or there was no home to which we could go. Or maybe we remember a time or a season in our life when we experienced what we felt as defeat, or even shame, or even humiliation. For that was the vessel, that was the human vessel into which these words of promise came. Or I invite us, if those images don't resonate, perhaps a season or a moment when we have felt forsaken, when we have felt abandoned. There is a lament, a spiritual lament that some of you may recall, the lament being, sometimes I feel like a motherless child, a long way from home. And so in this poetry, this prophetic poetry of promise, comes a rhetorical question. Well, maybe a rhetorical question. Remember it. Can a woman forget? Can a woman forget? Can a woman forget a child? And the words of God continue through the prophet. Even these may forget. The prophet says it is possible for a human mother both to love and embrace and comfort, and it is also possible for a human mother to forget. Yet, God says yet. If there's one word to take away from the sermon, take away this word yet. Yet, no matter what your experience has been up until this moment, yet, the voice of God says, I will not forget. I will not forget my people. I will not forget my persons. I will not forget the we. I will not forget the one. You might even say to yourself, God does not forget me. And some of us learned this verse, if we were a part of verse learning growing up. I have written your name in the palm of my hand. And maybe you, like me, can remember a time when we were actually using a pen, writing things in our hand. Remember to lock the door. Remember to put the cat out. Remember to get milk. Yes, you can raise your hand now if you've ever written something on the palm of your hand. Yes. So we learned this verse, I have written your name on the palm of my hand. But the word, and I'm no language scholar, I'm trusting the wisdom of the language scholars. The word doesn't mean so much written. And in the New Revised Standard Version, the word that the English word that's chosen for translate is I have inscribed. And I think the word we might want that is most familiar is I have tattooed your name on the palm of my hand. It's a permanent writing. It's not like the ink that smudges or rinses off. It's an inscription. It's a tattoo. Perhaps we will go home. What did you learn in church today? God has tattoos. Who knew? Yes. But imagine the hands of God. Draw in your mind's eye this image of the vast hands of God tattooed with the name of every soul. I have not forgotten you. How could I forget you? Because your name is tattooed on the palm of my hand. And so I hope that going forward, when there are times where you experience forsakenness or lostness or bleakness or hopelessness or that feeling of exile, I hope that you will take a moment to dip into the well of your faith and to recall that our names, it is promised, are tattooed on the palms of God's hands. I wanted to tell you today a story. This is a mother's story. It isn't about me, it's about another mother. It's about my grandmother. Her name was Jane. Her given name was actually Mary Jane, and then we called her Janie. And she was a woman of small stature with sparkling blue eyes, china blue eyes, and blue hair when I knew her as well. And my grandmother and grandfather lived in southern Minnesota, and my father and I would go visit there. My parents, when that was, we would go to visit there on their farm. Well, there'd been a change in our family. And it was a very difficult change for my father, as he had experienced something that had not happened in our family at all up to that point. He had experienced the end of a marriage, and he had been divorced. And he tried again and again by phone on the Sunday night phone calls home to the farm to tell his mama what had happened. And I watched him as a child trying and failing and trying and failing and trying again the next Sunday night. And finally, so much time has passed, he resolved we were going to go there for a visit, and he could tell her himself. And we were there for a week. And each day in that week, I watched him try to start the words, to say this thing that was such a heartbreak to him, that he felt was so new and strange to our family. And finally, our suitcases were packed. And it was the last day, the last hour of the day that we would be there. And he drew himself together. And he was a man of tall stature, about a foot taller than Grandma, and he leaned into her shoulder and he wept. And he told her that his marriage had ended, that he had experienced a divorce. And she said these words in a kind of Minnesota Norwegian English accent. "Oh, Jackie, is that all that's wrong?" Oh, Jackie, is that all that's wrong? And in that one sentence of grace, mother love, understanding, and compassion, the fear, the grief, the worry were swept away by those words. Oh, Jackie, is that all that's wrong? So I invite us in this moment as we close, perhaps to remember a time when some human soul spoke a word of extraordinary grace or mercy to us. It might have been a mama or a grandma. It might have been any dear soul that God put in your path to be the bearer of those words of grace and mercy and hope. The words that we heard spoken of comfort to the people of God at the end of a long exile. And I would say one last thing, and you can't often trust a preacher who says one last thing, but this actually is one last thing. Maybe those words will be yours to say to another. Maybe there's a dear one, a neighbor, or someone that you have not yet encountered who is going to be looking to you for the words of hope after a long exile, for the words of comfort and mercy in the context of forsakenness. The one who is looking to you to gather that one in the crook of your elbow and say, oh, dear one, is that all that's wrong? If you'd like to share a moment in conversation together now, I wouldn't presume to guide you, but I wondered if you might have in your minds and hearts now a memory or a moment of forsakenness or exile or forgottenness, or if you might have drawn into heart and mind a memory of rememberedness, of realizing that your name is tattooed, or a moment when you were welcomed